Hi everyone. This recorded PowerPoint lecture is going to go over Tintern Abbey, the poem by William Wordsworth that you should have read for class. So there's two major themes that we see in this poem that are very similar to the themes that we saw with William Blake, and it is both nature as a curative, or as I said earlier, the cure for things false was one of Wordsworth's early beliefs. And then there's also the discussion of growth and maturing from being a child into being an adult who has experienced the world. There's 5 major parts to the poem, so we're going to break each one of them down and discuss them individually. Keep in mind that this poem was written in 1798, so this was included in the first publication of Lyrical Ballads, and this reflects Wordsworth's early beliefs about nature, and this is definitely a more liberal and youthful side of Wordsworth than what we see later on in his work. So the first part, lines 1 through 22, reveals that this is the second time that he's actually visited this place. And it's been 5 years since he first visited it. And if you take a look at the picture on the right-hand side, this is actually what he pretty much would have been looking down on. That structure there is actually Tintern Abbey, and then the Y is the river that's there on the right-hand side. In line 7, he says that this is leading him to thoughts of more deep seclusion, which indicates that this is basically a meditation for him. And as we go on, we'll see how his meditation develops over his growth, basically. But in that first section, we get a lot of nature imagery and images of common people in harmony with nature. He says these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, these pastoral farms, and he also references a hermit's cave. So you can see basically what he would have been looking on would be those red structures that you see in the background, and that's what he's referring to here. Again, this is one of the themes that we see in his earlier works of the ideas of sympathy for the common people, but as I said in the lecture on his life, he does get disillusioned with that as he grows older. Part 2 is more internal reflection, and he says that he hasn't forgotten this scene of nature while he's in the city. He says it is not as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. So he did keep this in his mind, even though he wasn't actually physically seeing it. And he essentially is saying that he's relying on these scenes to keep him sane. And in lines 39 through 41, he says, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. So that by reflecting on these scenes, he was able to kind of ward off his depression of being in kind of a dreary city, most likely London, that didn't have as much of the natural beauty around him. Part 3 is the shortest part. It's only about 10 lines long. And again, that internal reflection kind of turns on him here. And he worries that his belief that we see into the life of things when we look into nature is wrong. And he worries about it for about 5 lines, and then he basically gets over it and says, well, okay, this is what works for me, so I'm going to keep believing in it. And he goes back to his praise of the area in lines 56 through 57 when he says, "O sylvan, why thou wander through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee." The last 2 parts are the longest parts. So part 4 is lines 58 through 111. And it begins as a reflection on his experience with nature as a young boy. And in lines 66 through 67, he says, "Though changed, no doubt, from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains." And a roe is a baby deer or a doe. So basically the idea of kind of bounding over things and being excited to be out in nature and enjoying it, but not necessarily understanding it or reflecting on what nature can possibly serve as more than just something to run and climb all over. As part 4 goes on, he acknowledges that he's gained experience, and this is similar to what we've talked about with William Blake, and that the fact that he has this experience now, it's colored his view of nature. However, he's not necessarily lamenting the fact that he no longer has that innocence. He actually kind of sees experience as a good thing and not necessarily a negative thing. In lines 91 through 97, we really get this, where he says, "The still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, through the ample power to chasten and subdue, and I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts." So he's saying now he really is able to reflect on what nature can provide and understand a little bit more deeply how it can be a cure for essentially depression or being in a spot where it's kind of gloomy and not as nature filled as Tintern Abbey is. In the final part, part 5, we learn that his sister Dorothy is actually with him, and she is his younger sister. And she says, he says that Dorothy is seeing nature as William once did. And in lines 117 through 119, he says, "The language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes." We don't really know. I don't think, no, Dorothy was not here with him the first time that he visited. So this is her first time seeing the beauty of this area. As the section goes on, he reflects on the fact that she's going to experience the same kind of changes and maturing that he has gone through. And he says, "The dreary intercourse of daily life shall ever prevail against us or disturb our cheerful faith that all which we behold is full of blessings." So she's going to have to go through daily life. She's going to have to go through living in a city, probably being rejected by suitors and things like that. But he hopes that she will still realize that there are things that are blessed and beautiful in life. And he ends this section by asking the moon to bless Dorothy in her growing up. So again, overall, those two themes that we really see are the idea of growth or maturing, and then nature as a curative. So this really works well as kind of a comparison for William Blake's works, although it does have some of the same themes that we are discussing in Coleridge's Christabel as well. And that's the end of this lecture.